I am Sophia Mitchell, 32 years old, and finally living my dream as a graphic designer in Chicago. After years of hard work, I had just been promoted to creative director. That evening, I was heading to my parents' suburban home for our monthly family dinner, excited to share my news. My brother Dylan would be there too. We had always been close, despite our differences. But when I arrived, something felt off. And then halfway through the main course, my father cleared his throat and said, "Your brother could really use your apartment. He needs more space for his new business." Before I continue this story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like your boundaries weren't respected by family. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. My apartment isn't anything extravagant, but it's mine, every square inch of it. Located in Wicker Park, it's a modest one-bedroom with hardwood floors, tall windows that flood the living room with morning light, and exposed brick walls I've covered with framed prints from local artists. The kitchen is small but functional, with the vintage teal refrigerator I bought at a flea market and restored myself. My bookshelf holds design references, novels, and small ceramic pieces I've collected over the years. It took me 5 years of saving, living with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment across town, putting aside every bonus and tax return until I finally had enough for the down payment. Growing up in our family home in Oak Park, it became clear early on that Dylan was the favorite. Not that my parents would ever admit it, they'd vehemently deny any suggestion of preferential treatment, but the evidence was there in countless small moments that accumulated over time. My father, Richard Mitchell, built his construction company from the ground up. A tall, imposing man with salt and pepper hair and a booming voice, he instilled traditional values in both of us: hard work, ambition, and family loyalty. Except when Dylan forgot to mow the lawn or came home with a C on his report card, Dad would ruffle his hair and say, "You'll do better next time, champ." When I made the same mistakes, I received a lecture on responsibility and the importance of applying myself. My mother, Eleanor, a former elementary school teacher who quit her job when Dylan was born, was subtler in her favoritism. She fussed over his needs, made his favorite meals when he was feeling down, and framed every one of his mediocre watercolor paintings from art class. My academic achievements earned a perfunctory, "That's nice, honey," while she'd call the entire extended family when Dylan made the B team in baseball. Dylan, nearly 3 years younger than me, grew up knowing he could charm his way out of anything. With his easy smile and our father's confident demeanor, he moved through life, expecting things to work out. And they usually did because our parents made sure of it. When he totaled his first car at 17, Dad bought him a new one within a week. When he dropped out of community college to find himself, Mom defended him at every family gathering. When he needed money for his first apartment, they covered his security deposit and first 3 months of rent. Meanwhile, I worked at the local grocery store during high school to save for college. I took out student loans and worked 2 part-time jobs while studying graphic design. After graduation, I started at the bottom as a design assistant at Marshall Creative, making coffee runs and formatting spreadsheets before I ever touched a professional design project. I lived with roommates, clipped coupons, and tracked every expense in a spreadsheet. When I finally landed my own apartment at 29, my parents attended my housewarming but brought a plant that was clearly purchased from the gas station on the way over. Don't get me wrong, I love my family. My mother's laugh is still one of my favorite sounds in the world. My father taught me to change a tire and always checked my oil when I visited. Even Dylan and I had good times together, staying up late, watching scary movies when we were kids, or the time he drove 3 hours to help me move into my first post-college apartment. But there was always that undercurrent, the unspoken hierarchy that placed Dylan's needs above mine. I had spent years in therapy working through my complicated feelings about this dynamic. Dr. Rivera helped me understand that I could love my family while also acknowledging these painful truths, which is why I was so excited about my promotion. After 3 years at Apex Design Studio, I had been named creative director, the youngest in the company's history. I would be leading a team of 12 designers and handling major accounts for national brands. This wasn't just a title bump. It was validation of everything I had worked for since college. The evening of that fateful dinner, I had spent extra time getting ready. I wore a new emerald green dress that complemented my hazel eyes and dark hair, which I had recently cut into a sleek bob. I splurged on a bottle of champagne, not the cheap stuff, but a proper French champagne that cost more than I'd normally spend on a week of groceries. I imagined my father popping the cork, my mother getting the good glasses from the china cabinet, all of us toasting to my success. I pulled my Honda Civic into my parents' driveway at exactly 6:30 p.m. Their two-story colonial looked the same as always, perfectly maintained lawn American flag by the front door, warm lights glowing from within. I checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, grabbed the champagne, and headed inside with a flutter of excitement in my stomach. "I'm here," I called out as I let myself in through the front door. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sophia, right on time." Her hug was quick, distracted. "Your father's watching the game and Dylan just called. He's running late as usual." I followed her into the kitchen where the familiar smell of her pot roast filled the air. "I brought champagne," I said, placing the bottle on the counter. "I thought we could celebrate." Mom glanced at the bottle, then back to her potatoes. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Would you set the table? The good plates are still packed away from the remodel, so just use the everyday ones." Something felt off, but I brushed it aside. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment to ask about my work. Maybe they wanted Dylan to be there for any celebration. When my brother finally arrived 30 minutes late, he gave me a quick side hug before heading straight to Dad in the living room. I heard them laughing about someone from Dad's golf club as I finished helping Mom in the kitchen. By the time we all sat down for dinner, the champagne remained unopened on the kitchen counter, and no one had asked me a single question about my life or work. Instead, the conversation revolved around Dad's business, Mom's garden club drama, and Dylan's complaints about his current rental apartment being too small for all his business equipment. That should have been my first clue about what was coming. "Pass the potatoes, would you, Sophia?" Dad asked, not looking up from his plate. The dining room looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Heavy oak furniture, floral wallpaper my mother refused to update, and family photos arranged chronologically along the sideboard. I noticed there were 3 new frames featuring Dylan's recent ski trip to Aspen, a trip funded by our parents, of course. So I said, seizing a brief lull in conversation after my father finished complaining about property taxes, "I have some exciting news to share." Mom smiled vaguely in my direction while refilling Dylan's water glass. "That's nice, honey. I got promoted to creative director at Apex. It's a really big deal. I'll be leading the entire creative team and—" "That reminds me," Dad interrupted, turning to Dylan. "How's the planning coming along for that new venture of yours, the one with the websites?" Dylan perked up immediately. "It's going to be huge. I'm developing an app that helps people organize their digital photos. Think Instagram meets Dropbox, but with a twist." It was at least the 5th game-changing business idea he'd had in the past 3 years. None had materialized into anything beyond expensive equipment purchases and elaborate explanations about market timing not being right. "The only problem," Dylan continued, fork waving in the air, "is that my current place is way too small for a proper home office setup. I need multiple monitors, server space room for when I start hiring assistants." Dad nodded seriously, as if Dylan had just outlined a foolproof business plan instead of vague aspirations. "That's what your mother and I wanted to talk about tonight, actually." He cleared his throat and finally looked at me. "Your brother could really use your apartment. He needs more space for his new business." I froze fork midway to my mouth. "Excuse me. Now hear us out." Mom jumped in her voice, taking on that placating tone she used when trying to smooth over something uncomfortable. "Dylan's place is that tiny 1-bedroom in Rogers Park. Your apartment has so much more space and you're just one person." I set my fork down carefully. "My apartment is also a 1-bedroom. It's not exactly a mansion. But you have that alcove that would be perfect for a home office," Dylan interjected. "And your building has the faster internet connection I need for my servers." "We thought it would make sense," Dad continued, "as if I hadn't spoken for you two to swap. Dylan would take your place and you could move into his rental. It would only be temporary, of course. Just until his business gets off the ground." I looked around the table waiting for someone to laugh, to say they were joking. They weren't. "But I own my apartment," I said slowly. "Dylan rents his place. Those aren't comparable situations." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "We've thought of that. You could rent your apartment to Dylan at the same rate he's paying now, and then you'd take over his lease. It's actually a better financial deal for you since his rent is lower." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I bought my apartment. I have a mortgage. I've spent years making it exactly how I want it. I can't just swap." It's not like you'd be giving it up completely, Dylan said, with an edge of impatience. You'd still own it. I'd just be living there. And paying her less than her mortgage costs, I pointed out, feeling a flush of anger rising up my neck. So I would be subsidizing your living situation while disrupting my entire life. Dad's expression hardened slightly. Sophia family helps family. When you needed money for those expensive college textbooks, who helped you out? When your car broke down last year, who paid for the repairs? I stared at him in disbelief. I paid you back for the textbooks within 6 months. And I didn't ask for help with my car you offered, and then insisted when I said I could handle it myself. The point is, Mom interjected, her voice taking on a slight quiver that I recognized as the prelude to emotional manipulation. Sometimes we all need to make sacrifices for the people we love. Dylan is at a crucial point in his life right now, and I'm not, I finally managed to say. I just got promoted to creative director. I have the youngest person in company history to hold that position. It's a huge opportunity that I've worked incredibly hard for. There was an awkward pause before Mom said, "Yes, that's very nice, dear. We're proud of you." But her tone made it clear this was merely a platitude before returning to the real topic of interest. Dylan's also going through a tough time emotionally, she continued. After his breakup with Rachel, having a fresh start in a new place would really help his mental health. I looked at my brother, who was examining his fingernails with exaggerated casualness. His devastating breakup had been a 3-month relationship that ended because Rachel got tired of him borrowing money and never paying it back. "This is crazy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually asking me to give up my home for Dylan's latest whim." "It's not a whim," Dylan snapped. "This business is going to be huge. I could be making millions within a year. Just like the protein shake delivery service was going to be huge. And the custom sneaker design website. And the podcast about cryptocurrency." "I need to use the bathroom," I said abruptly, pushing away from the table. I could feel tears threatening, and I refused to cry in front of them. As I walked away, I heard my mother say something about me always being so sensitive. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My carefully applied makeup was now smudged, my excitement from earlier completely deflated. I took deep breaths, trying to process what had just happened. They hadn't even acknowledged my promotion, the biggest achievement of my professional life, before asking me to give up my home for Dylan's hypothetical business needs. As I stood there gripping the edges of the sink, I realized this request was just the latest in a lifetime of expectations that I would step aside for Dylan. But this time, they were asking too much. My apartment wasn't just a place to live. It represented everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made to build my independent life. I straightened my shoulders, fixed my makeup as best I could, and prepared to go back out there and stand my ground. No matter how uncomfortable it would make everyone at the dinner table. I returned to the dining room to find my family discussing the logistics of my apartment swap, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. My mother was mid-sentence, "Could help you pack this weekend, and we have those boxes in the garage from when we redid the guest room." I haven't agreed to anything, I said, sliding back into my seat. I kept my voice calm and measured, determined not to let emotion undermine my position. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. "Sophia," my father began in his problem-solving voice, the one he used when explaining something obvious to someone being deliberately obtuse. "We're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense for everyone here. What makes sense is for me to keep living in the apartment that I bought, that I renovated, and that I've made my home," I replied. "And for Dylan to find a bigger rental if that's what he needs." Dylan rolled his eyes. "Do you know how expensive bigger apartments are these days? I'd have to pay at least $500 more a month for something with an extra bedroom." "That's called the housing market," I said. "We all deal with it." My mother placed her hand over mine in what was meant to be a soothing gesture. "Sweetie, it would only be temporary. A year, maybe 2 at most, until Dylan gets his business established." I pulled my hand away. "And what happens if I caught myself and corrected when his business takes longer than expected, or if he decides to pivot to a different idea halfway through? This isn't the first time Dylan has started something new." "That's unfair," my brother protested. "This idea is different. I've done the research. I've got investors interested." "Who?" I challenged. "Actual investors or Dad?" My father's face reddened. "I believe in your brother's potential. And you should too, instead of trying to hold him back because of some feminist independence thing. The room went silent. Even my mother looked shocked at his words. Feminist independence thing, I repeated slowly. You mean my desire to keep the home that I purchased with my own money? That I pay the mortgage on every month? That I've spent years saving for? You know what I mean, Dad muttered. Family should come first. I agree, I said. Family should come first. So, when are you offering Dylan your house? It has much more space than my apartment. The basement would make an excellent office. My mother gasped. That's completely different. How you and Dad have 4 bedrooms and it's just the two of you. Surely you could sacrifice temporarily to help your son's business dreams. We're not uprooting our entire lives at our age, my father said firmly. Neither am I responded with equal firmness. A tense silence fell over the table. My mother broke it with a sigh. If it's a question of money, your father and I could help with the rent for a new place. We'd cover the difference between Dylan's current rent and what you'd pay somewhere else. That they were willing to subsidize my housing but not simply help. Dylan afford a larger apartment spoke volumes about the real purpose of this scheme, to give my brother what he wanted at my expense, not to solve a legitimate housing problem. This isn't about money, I said. It's about respecting that I've built a life for myself just like you taught me to. It's about acknowledging that my home matters just as much as Dylan's needs. No one is saying your home doesn't matter, my mother insisted. Aren't you? Because it feels like you're saying exactly that. Dylan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. God, you're always so dramatic about everything. This is why I didn't want to ask you directly. I knew you'd make it into some big thing about fairness and your feelings being hurt. You didn't ask me directly because you knew I'd say no, I shot back. So you got Mom and Dad to ambush me instead. Ambush is a strong word, my father said. Is it you invited me to dinner, ignored my career news, and then sprung this on me over pot roast? What would you call it? The conversation spiraled from there. My mother started crying, saying she just wanted her children to get along. My father suggested that maybe I'd understand family obligations better when I had children of my own. Dylan made a cutting remark about me being always selfish and making everything about me. Throughout it all, I maintained my position I would not be giving up my apartment. Not for a month, not for a year, not at all. I can't believe how inflexible you're being, my father finally said, throwing his napkin on the table. When did you become so cold? I'm not being cold, I said, my voice finally breaking. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference. Well, your boundary is hurting this family, my mother said tearfully. I looked at each of them in turn, my father's anger, my mother's manipulative tears, my brother's entitled expectation, and something crystallized within me. This wasn't about an apartment. This was about a lifetime of patterns of always being expected to sacrifice my needs for Dylan's wants. I stood up, retrieved my purse from the coat rack, and returned to the dining room doorway. I love you all, but I'm not giving up my apartment. Not now, not ever. If that makes me selfish in your eyes, I'll have to live with that. But this conversation is over. As I headed for the door, my father called after me, Sophia Mitchell, don't you walk out on this family? I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'm not walking out on our family. I'm walking away from this conversation. There's a difference. I'll call you tomorrow when everyone's had a chance to cool down. And with that, I left the uneaten pot roast and uncorked champagne, left behind symbols of a celebration that never happened, and a family dinner that had gone terribly wrong. The digital clock on my car dashboard read 8:47 p.m. as I pulled away from my parents' house, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The dinner had lasted less than 2 hours, yet it felt like I'd aged a decade. Tears blurred my vision, and I had to pull over on a quiet side street to collect myself. I called Megan my best friend since college and the only person who truly understood the complicated dynamics of my family. What she practically shouted when I explained what had happened. Are you kidding me? They want you to give your apartment to Dylan. The same Dylan who borrowed $300 from you last Christmas and never paid it back. Hearing someone else's outrage validated my own feelings. They acted like I was being unreasonable for saying no. That's complete garbage, Megan said fiercely. Your family has some serious issues with boundaries where Dylan is concerned. Do you want me to come over? I can bring wine and those chocolate chip cookies you like from the bakery near my place. I glanced at my puffy eyes in the rearview mirror. Could you I don't want to be alone right now. I'm already putting on my shoes. See you in 30. By the time I got home, 3 text messages had appeared on my phone. Mom, we're worried about you driving while upset. Please text when you get home safely. Dad, we should talk more when you calm down. This reaction was disproportionate. Dylan, thanks for ruining dinner. Mom's crying. I sent my mother a brief home-safe text and ignored the others. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar comfort, the soft gray couch I'd saved for 6 months to buy the collection of plants thriving on my windowsills, the gallery wall of framed art I'd carefully curated. Every corner held a piece of me of the life I'd built independently. The thought of surrendering it to Dylan, who would likely treat it carelessly, filled me with both anger and sadness. When Megan arrived with promised wine and cookies, we settled on my living room floor backs against the couch, like we used to do in college. Tell me exactly what happened, she said, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet. So I did, recounting every detail of the ambush dinner. The worst part, I concluded, is that they completely glossed over my promotion. It's like my achievements don't even register compared to Dylan's needs. Because they don't, Megan said bluntly. I've watched this pattern for years, Soph. Your parents have different expectations for you than they do for Dylan. You're supposed to be the responsible, self-sufficient one who needs nothing while he gets endless support and resources. I took a large sip of wine. Dr. Rivera says it's classic family dynamics, the reliable daughter versus the son who needs help. She thinks there's a gender component too. Yeah, think Megan raised an eyebrow. Would your parents ever ask Dylan to disrupt his life for your convenience? To give up something he worked for so you could have it easier? I doubt it. She was right, and we both knew it. Throughout the night, we analyzed the patterns that had defined my family relationships for decades. How I'd been conditioned to put everyone else's needs before my own. How my parents viewed my independence not as an achievement but as a signal that I didn't need their attention or support. How Dylan had learned that struggling meant getting help while my struggles were met with expectations of self-sufficiency. Am I being selfish, though? I asked in a small voice around midnight as we finished the last of the cookies. Is it wrong to prioritize my home over helping my brother? Megan fixed me with a serious look. Sophia, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. Your apartment isn't just walls and floors, it's symbolic of everything you've accomplished on your own. Giving it up wouldn't just be a temporary inconvenience. It would be a tangible representation of the message your family has been sending your whole life, that your needs come second to Dylan's. I slept poorly that night, despite Megan staying over in my guest room. Around 3 a.m., I found myself scrolling through family photos on my phone, trying to reconcile the parents who had taught me to be independent and hardworking with the ones who now seemed disappointed when I applied those very values. Morning brought a barrage of messages. My mother had texted the family group chat. I think we should consider family therapy to help Sophia work through her issues with sharing and family support. My father had called twice and left a voicemail. I've been thinking about your concerns, and I'm prepared to offer financial compensation for the inconvenience of moving. We could discuss numbers when you're ready to be reasonable. Dylan had posted a vague but pointed Instagram story. Some people claim to care about family but show their true colors when asked for help. Number disappointed. Number selfish. And then came the extended family messages. My Aunt Linda called, having heard there was some trouble at dinner. My cousin Rachel texted asking if everything was okay because Uncle Richard seemed upset when Mom called him this morning. Even my grandmother weighed in with a cryptic message: family should stick together through thick and thin. Call your mother. It was clear my parents had been spreading their version of events, likely casting me as the villain who refused to help my struggling brother. Megan, witnessing my growing distress as the messages accumulated gently, took my phone away. Okay, enough of that. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to take a shower, put on your power outfit, and go to work. Focus on your new position. Be brilliant. I'll come by tonight with takeout, and we can draft some boundaries for moving forward with your family. Work provided a welcome distraction. My new team was enthusiastic about my leadership, and I threw myself into outlining vision for upcoming projects. My boss Jennifer stopped by my office to officially welcome me to the executive team. We're expecting great things from you, Sophia, she said with a warm smile. Your portfolio and client management skills are exactly what we've been looking for in this role. The validation felt like cool water in a desert. Here my accomplishments were recognized. Here, my voice was heard. Here, I wasn't Dylan's dramatic sister, but Sophia Mitchell, creative director. By the time I returned home, I felt stronger, more centered. Megan arrived with Thai food and practical advice. You need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your family moving forward, she said as we ate pad thai on my balcony. What are your non-negotiables? I thought about it seriously. I need them to respect my boundaries, to acknowledge my achievements the way they acknowledge Dylan's potential, to treat us equally. And if they can't do that, the question hung in the air between us. Then I need enough distance to protect myself from constantly feeling less than. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, trying to untangle the complex web of family loyalty, self-worth, and independence. One line stood out as I reread my jumbled thoughts. Loving my family doesn't mean I have to diminish myself to fit their expectations. It became my mantra for the difficult days ahead. The week that followed was tense but manageable. I went to work focused on my new responsibilities and limited my communication with my family to brief text exchanges. My father had adopted a strategy of acting as if our argument had been a minor disagreement that would resolve itself when I came to my senses. My mother alternated between guilt-inducing messages about family unity and passive-aggressive comments about children who forget where they came from. Dylan had gone completely silent, which was actually a relief. I was just beginning to think the apartment issue had been dropped when my doorbell rang on Saturday morning. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway, and behind them, partially obscured, was Dylan. I considered not answering, but they knew I was home. My car was visible in its assigned spot in the building's lot. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. "What a surprise," I said, not bothering to mask the tension in my voice. "We thought it was time to talk in person," my mother said, already pushing past me into the apartment. My father followed, giving me a nod that seemed both apologetic and determined. Dylan slouched in, last carrying what looked like a measuring tape. "I'm actually busy this morning," I began, but they were already making themselves at home in my living room. "This won't take long," my father said in his business voice. "We've come up with a solution that addresses everyone's concerns." I remained standing while they sat arms crossed defensively across my chest. I wasn't aware my concerns needed addressing. "I've been very clear about my position." My mother smiled in that placating way that always made me feel like a difficult child. "We know you're attached to your apartment, sweetie. But we think once you see the details we've worked out, you'll understand this is best for everyone." Dylan had wandered into my home office alcove and was extending his measuring tape across the wall. "This is perfect," he said, ignoring our conversation entirely. "My developer setup would fit exactly here." "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Just checking measurements," he replied casually. "I need to know if my equipment will fit before I commit to anything." The audacity was breathtaking. "Commit to what? This isn't happening, Dylan." My father cleared his throat. "Sophia, we've worked out a very fair arrangement. You'd keep ownership of the apartment, of course. Dylan would pay you what he currently pays in rent, and we would subsidize the difference between that and your mortgage payment. You could move into his place rent-free, as we'd cover that entirely." "And when would this arrangement end?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My parents exchanged glances. "Well, my mother said we'd revisit the situation annually, but we're thinking 2 to 3 years would give Dylan enough time to establish his business." Dylan had moved to my bedroom, now opening closets and commenting on how much space I had compared to his closet-sized apartment. I followed him, growing increasingly angry. "Get out of my bedroom," I said firmly. "Just checking where I'd put my clothes," he replied, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to do in someone else's home. "You have way more closet space than I do. Did Mom and Dad pay for this place? It's really nice." "That was it," I snapped. "No, Dylan, Mom and Dad didn't pay for this place. I did. With money I earned from the career I've built while you've been jumping from one next big thing to another. And none of you seem to understand that this is my home, not an available resource for Dylan's latest whim." I stormed back to the living room. "I need you all to leave. Now." My father stood, his face reddening. "We've driven all this way." "I didn't ask you to come," I interrupted. "I've been clear from the beginning that I'm not giving up my apartment. The fact that you showed up with measuring tape shows you haven't heard a word I've said." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We already told Dylan he could have the apartment. We thought once we explained." "You promised him my apartment." I was incredulous. Without my consent. We assumed you'd come around once you had time to think about it, my father said defensively. Family helps family, Sophia. That's how we raised you. And I do help, I countered. I've loaned Dylan money. I've helped him move. I've proofread his business plans and given him design advice for free. But this is too much. Dylan wandered back into the living room. The guest bathroom is kind of small, but I guess it'll do. Oh, and I already gave notice at my place. My lease is up at the end of the month. The room went silent. I stared at him in disbelief. You did what? He shrugged. Dad said it would be fine. I turned to my father, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. You told him to give notice before even talking to me again. We thought it would expedite things, he mumbled. Expedite things, I repeated, my voice rising. This isn't a business transaction. This is my life. Don't be so dramatic, Dylan said, rolling his eyes. It's just an apartment. You can get another one. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. All of you. Get out of my home right now. Sophia, my mother began. You're being unreasonable. No, what's unreasonable is promising my home to someone else and then acting surprised when I object. What's unreasonable is completely dismissing my feelings and boundaries. What's unreasonable is expecting me to uproot my life because Dylan gave notice on his apartment based on a promise you had no right to make. My father's face hardened. I'm concerned about your mental state, Sophia. This reaction is not normal or healthy. Perhaps you should talk to someone professional. That was the breaking point. My own father suggesting I was mentally unstable for refusing to give up my home. I already see a therapist, I said coldly. And she fully supports my right to set boundaries with my family. Now, for the last time, please leave. They left reluctantly, my mother in tears, my father tight-lipped with disapproval, and Dylan muttering about my selfishness. As I closed the door behind them, my mother turned and said, We're deeply disappointed in you, Sophia. We raised you better than this. The door clicked shut, and I collapsed against it, sliding to the floor, as tears streamed down my face. In the silent apartment that was still mine, at least for now, I felt both victorious for standing my ground and utterly devastated by the realization that my family's love seemed conditional on my compliance with their expectations. The weeks following my family's ambush visit were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. My parents' communication dwindled to perfunctory text messages checking if I was feeling more reasonable yet. Dylan sent a single message informing me he'd figured it out, no thanks to you, and had found a different apartment though, at significant financial hardship. I later learned from my cousin Rachel that my parents had covered his security deposit and first month's rent. The silence was both a relief and a punishment. After years of trying to earn my family's approval and recognition, I was now experiencing the consequence of defying their expectations, emotional distance. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my new role as creative director, arriving early, staying late, and pouring my creative energy into client projects. My team responded enthusiastically to my leadership, and the positive feedback from colleagues helped fill the void left by my family's disapproval. You've really hit the ground running, Jennifer remarked during our monthly check-in. The Westfield campaign concepts are some of the strongest work I've seen from the team in years. Her words were a balm to my bruised self-confidence. Here at least my efforts were seen and valued. I continued my weekly sessions with Dr. Rivera, which took on new urgency as I processed the fallout from setting boundaries with my family. What you're experiencing is quite common when someone from a dysfunctional family system begins to change the established patterns, she explained during one particularly emotional session. When you refuse to play your assigned role in your case, the accommodating, self-sacrificing daughter, it forces others to confront their own roles and behaviors. That's uncomfortable, so they try to push you back into compliance. But why does it have to be this way? I asked, dabbing at tears with a tissue. Why can't they just respect my decision about my own home? Because it's not really about the apartment, Dr. Rivera said gently. It's about the system that's been in place for decades, one where Dylan's needs are prioritized and yours are minimized. When you challenge that system, you're challenging their entire family narrative. We worked on identifying the patterns that had shaped my relationship with my family, how I'd been conditioned to seek approval by putting everyone else's needs first, how I measured my worth by how much I could give or sacrifice, how I'd internalized the message that my brother was somehow more deserving of support than I was. The hardest part of this process, Dr. Rivera warned, will be holding firm to your boundaries without letting guilt or loneliness drive you back into old patterns. Recovery from family dysfunction isn't linear. There will be setbacks. She was right. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I broke down and called my mother, hoping for reconciliation. The conversation started well, but quickly deteriorated when she mentioned that Dylan's new apartment was hardly adequate for his business needs. "I'm sorry it didn't work out for him," I said carefully, "but I'm glad he found a place. It would have been so much easier if you had just helped out," she sighed. "Family should come first, Sophia." The familiar guilt rose within me, but I pushed it back down. "Mom, I love you and Dylan and Dad. But my home is not available. That's a boundary I need you all to respect." "Well," she said stiffly, "your father and I are still very disappointed in your attitude." It hurt, but I didn't crumble. After the call, instead of spiraling into self-doubt, I texted Megan, "Just stood firm with Mom. Still feel guilty, but also proud." "Progress?" "Huge progress," she texted back immediately, followed by a string of celebratory emojis. As the weeks became months, I gradually built a support system outside my family. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with, joined a book club in my neighborhood, and even started dating again after a 2-year hiatus following a difficult breakup. Meanwhile, as Dr. Rivera had predicted, Dylan's business venture faltered before it even launched. Through the family grapevine, I heard that his investors had pulled out, and he was now working part-time at our father's construction company while exploring new opportunities. Exactly as I had expected. What I hadn't expected was the freedom that came with distance from my family's expectations. Without the constant need to prove my worth or seek their approval, I found myself making decisions based solely on what I wanted: a novel concept after 3 decades of prioritizing others. I repainted my living room a bold teal that my mother would have called too dramatic. I booked a solo trip to Portugal, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because my family considered solo female travel risky and odd. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, ignoring my father's lifelong insistence that pets were too much responsibility. Each decision, however small, was an affirmation of my right to shape my own life according to my own values. The true test came when my parents reached out after nearly 3 months of minimal contact. My mother's text was brief. "Dylan needs help again. Can we talk?" I felt the familiar pull of obligation, the ingrained desire to drop everything and rush to solve the family crisis. But instead of immediately responding, I took time to consider what I was and wasn't willing to do. When I finally called back, I started the conversation with clear boundaries. "I'm happy to talk about how Dylan is doing, but I want to be clear that my apartment is still not an option." My mother sighed heavily. "We weren't going to ask about that again. But he's struggling financially and might need to move back home temporarily. We thought you might be willing to help with his car payments for a few months." The old me would have agreed immediately, eager to prove my value to the family. The new me paused and said, "I need to think about that. I'll let you know by the end of the week." After consulting with Dr. Rivera and examining my own finances and feelings, I decided that I could afford to help with 2 months of payments, but not the open-ended commitment my parents were hoping for. When I called back with my decision, my father was clearly disappointed by the limitations I'd placed on my assistance, but I held firm. It was a small victory, but a significant one. I was learning that I could support my family without sacrificing my own well-being, that love didn't have to mean self-erasure. By the 6-month mark after the initial dinner confrontation, I had established a new normal with my family: limited contact on my terms, clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss, and a newfound ability to withstand their disapproval without falling apart. It wasn't the warm, unconditionally supportive family relationship I had always craved, but it was honest. And in its honesty, there was a kind of freedom I had never experienced before. "She wants to meet for coffee," I told Megan during our weekly lunch. Just the 2 of us. It had been 3 months since the car payment negotiation, and my mother had reached out unexpectedly, suggesting we meet at a cafe halfway between our homes. Megan raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to go?" I pushed my salad around with my fork. "I think so." She sounded different on the phone. Less demanding, more tentative. "Just be careful," Megan warned. "Remember what happened last time you thought things were improving?" I nodded, remembering the painful phone call that had devolved into another guilt trip. "I'll keep my expectations realistic." 2 days later, I found myself sitting at a corner table in Cassidy's cafe, nervously checking my watch every few minutes. When my mother walked in, I was struck by how much older she looked than when I'd last seen her. There were new lines around her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was showing more gray than I remembered. "Sophia," she said, approaching the table. There was a moment of awkward hesitation before we exchanged a brief hug. "You look well," she commented as we settled into our seats. "The new job must be agreeing with you." "It is," I confirmed. "My team just won a regional advertising award for the Westfield campaign." "That's wonderful," she said, and for once she seemed genuinely pleased for me. "Your father saw the billboards on his way to the golf club. He said they were very impressive." A small warmth bloomed in my chest at this unexpected acknowledgement. We ordered our drinks, a latte for me, Earl Grey, for her, and made small talk about the weather and her garden club until the server disappeared. So I said, "Finally, what did you want to talk about?" My mother wrapped her hands around her teacup, staring into it as if searching for words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months. About our family, about how things have been between us." She paused. "I miss you, Sophia." The simple admission caught me off guard. My mother rarely expressed vulnerability. "I miss you too," I admitted. "But I couldn't keep doing things the way we were." She nodded slowly. "I understand that better now. I've been reading some books about family dynamics." She said the term as if it were foreign vocabulary she was still learning. "I think I've realized some things haven't been fair to you." I sat in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented acknowledgement. "The way we handled the apartment situation was wrong," she continued. "We should have respected your decision immediately instead of pushing. And we should have celebrated your promotion properly." "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge those things." We talked for nearly an hour, covering ground we had never explored before. She admitted that she and my father had always expected different things from me than from Dylan: more responsibility, more self-sufficiency, more accomplishment, without really examining why. She acknowledged that it must have felt unfair many times throughout my childhood and adult life. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments when her old defensiveness flared, particularly when I brought up specific, painful memories from my childhood. And there was a noticeable absence of any plan for how things might be different moving forward. But it felt like a start. Then, just as I was beginning to hope for genuine reconciliation, she said, "Your father and Dylan still think you should have helped with the apartment, though." The familiar disappointment settled in my stomach. "Mom, I'm not saying I agree," she added quickly. "I'm just caught in the middle here. Your father thinks you're being stubborn and Dylan feels rejected by you. It's hard for me to navigate between all of you." "I'm not asking you to take sides," I said. "I'm asking to be treated with the same consideration you give Dylan. To have my boundaries respected the way his wants are respected." She sighed. "It's just that Dylan has always needed more support. You've always been so capable, so independent." "But that doesn't mean I don't need support too," I pointed out. "It doesn't mean my accomplishments should be overlooked while his potential is celebrated." A flash of the old defensiveness crossed her face. "We've always been proud of you." "Have you?" I asked quietly. "Because I can't remember the last time either you or Dad actually said that to me without a "but" attached to it." She looked genuinely surprised. "Of course we're proud. You have a good job, a nice apartment. Those are observations, Mom, not expressions of pride." "When was the last time you called family members to brag about something I achieved? When was the last time Dad mentioned my accomplishments to his golf buddies the way he talks about Dylan's business ideas?" She fell silent, unable to come up with examples. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I continued gently. "But this is part of the pattern that's been so painful for me. Dylan gets celebrated for his potential, while my actual achievements are just expected." My mother stirred her tea, which had long gone cold. "I never thought of it that way." We parted with another awkward hug and a promise to talk again soon. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt a mix of sadness and liberation. The conversation hadn't yielded the full reconciliation I might have hoped for, but it had confirmed something important. I could speak my truth without falling apart, and I could love my family without sacrificing my self-respect. In the car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. The coffee shop meeting had clarified. Something I had been struggling to accept. True reconciliation might not be possible yet or ever if my family couldn't fundamentally change their perspective on our roles and relationships. But that didn't mean I had to cut them off entirely. Perhaps there was a middle ground, a kind of limited, boundaried relationship that protected my well-being while leaving the door open for genuine change if it ever came. As I drove home to my apartment, still mine, still the symbol of my independence and accomplishment, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For perhaps the first time in my life, I wasn't desperately seeking my family's approval or validation. And in that freedom from their judgment, I had found something more valuable, my own. 6 months after that fateful dinner where my parents asked me to give up my apartment for Dylan, autumn had settled over Chicago. The maple outside my living room window had turned a brilliant red, and I decorated my apartment with small pumpkins and a rustic wreath on the door. Inside, everything was different too, not just the fresh coat of teal paint in the living room or the new area rug, but the energy of the space. It felt more completely mine than ever before. At work, my promotion to creative director had proven to be everything I'd hoped for and more. Under my leadership, our team had secured 3 major new clients and won a prestigious industry award for the Westfield campaign. Jennifer had pulled me aside after the quarterly meeting to tell me I was exceeding all expectations and was being considered for an additional year-end bonus. "Your confidence has really blossomed these past few months," she observed. "It shows in your presentations and your team management." She wasn't the only one who'd noticed the change. My relationship with Jacob, a kind and thoughtful architect I'd met through my book club, was developing into something serious. Unlike previous relationships where I'd contorted myself to meet someone else's expectations with Jacob, I felt comfortable being authentically myself, including sharing the complicated story of my family dynamics. "I admire how you've handled everything," he told me one evening, as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. Setting boundaries is hard, especially with family. Most surprisingly, my relationship with my family had shifted into something I couldn't have imagined a year ago. After our coffee shop meeting, my mother had continued her tentative steps toward genuine understanding. She'd started seeing a therapist of her own, something she would have dismissed as unnecessary in the past, and was slowly, imperfectly working on changing patterns that had defined our family for decades. My father had been more resistant to change, but even he had taken a small but significant step. After months of minimal communication, he had called me directly, not to discuss Dylan or make demands, but to apologize. "I've been thinking about what happened with the apartment," he said gruffly. "Your mother thinks, and I agree, that I owe you an apology. We shouldn't have put pressure on you that way." Coming from my father, who had never been comfortable with admitting mistakes, it was monumental. Dylan had moved back in with our parents exactly as I had predicted. His latest business venture had collapsed before launching, and the apartment he'd rented after our confrontation had proven too expensive for his inconsistent income. But surprisingly, this failure had prompted some reflection on his part too. "I should have talked to you directly," he admitted during a cautious phone call, "instead of getting Mom and Dad involved. That wasn't fair." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the entitlement that had driven the whole situation, but it was something. And for now, something was enough. The most profound changes, though, had happened within me. Therapy had helped me understand the family patterns that had shaped my self-worth and expectations. I'd learned to recognize when I was slipping into people-pleasing behavior out of habit, to ask myself what I actually wanted rather than automatically prioritizing others' needs, and to stand firm in the face of guilt, manipulation. "You've done remarkable work," Dr. Rivera told me during what would be one of our final regular sessions. "How does it feel to be on this side of everything that happened?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've put down a weight I didn't even know I was carrying." To celebrate this new chapter, I decided to host a small dinner party in my apartment, a gathering of my chosen family. Megan was there with her boyfriend Carlos, along with Jacob and a few close colleagues who had become friends. My actual family wasn't present, but that was okay. We were working toward a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation, but we weren't there yet. As I looked around my dining table at the faces of people who valued me exactly as I was, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey to this moment had been painful but necessary. By standing firm in my worth and refusing to give up the home I'd worked so hard for, I had discovered something far more valuable than approval: the freedom to define my own life on my own terms. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was alone in my apartment, still mine, always mine, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine looking out at the city lights. I thought about how often we're taught that love means sacrifice, that family means putting others first, no matter the cost to ourselves. But I had learned a different, more nuanced truth that genuine love requires boundaries, that healthy relationships thrive on mutual respect, and that sometimes the hardest but most important thing we can do is stand firm in our worth. The apartment around me wasn't just walls and floors and furniture. It was a testament to everything I had built for myself, my independence, my career, my life, on my own terms. By refusing to give it up, I hadn't just kept a physical space. I had claimed my right to prioritize my own needs without guilt or apology. And that, I realized as I watched the moon rise over the Chicago skyline, was the greatest gift I could have given myself. So if you're watching this and struggling with family expectations, with setting boundaries, or with finding the courage to stand up for yourself, know that it's not selfish to protect what matters to you. It's not wrong to expect respect and consideration. And it's never too late to change the patterns that no longer serve you. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and share your experience. Your story might help someone else find their own courage. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics, and share with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve to prioritize their own well-being too. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how authentically you live your truth.